let me say, texts and how we do analyze it, but we have to have an idea about some factors, some, let me say, items, some elements which are very much necessary to be understood before we even start analyzing a test. I have just talked about identities and relationships. Now I will talk about politics. The distribution of social goods. I talk and act in such a way that a visibly angry male in a committee meeting, perhaps it's me, is standing his ground on a principle, but a visibly angry female is hysterical. In other words, how we understand even anger, how we can explain why somebody is angry could be understood in different ways depending, for example, like the example I have given, whether I'm talking about a male or a female. If the angry person is a man, I have understood it in a meeting. I mean that he's angry because he has principles and he insisted on making his principles, let me say, applied or being followed. But the angry woman could be understood in another way. It is not the same way that I have explained the political behavior of a given man in a given meeting, for example. Connections. In general, when I say something, or if I write something, I have to keep in mind and I have to consider what I have already said in the past. What I write now must not contradict with what I wrote even in the past. What I say now must not contradict what I said some months or even years ago. And even in other words, we have a connection. We have to have a connection between what we say now and what we said in the past. So I talk and act so as to make what I am saying here and now in this committee meeting about whether we should admit more minority students connected or relevant to what I said last week about my fears of losing my job given the new government's turn to the right. In other words, if in a committee meeting I supported the idea that the minority students are to be given the chance to study at the universities, to be financially supported, this indeed goes in line with what I said last week or some weeks ago, that the government might turn to the right. In other words, might tend to stop giving the students who belong to the minorities, especially in the West, let me say, free fees or the same opportunities that are given. For example, suppose we are talking about a given country in the West, what the local students are given. So what I say in the committee meeting must be connected to what I said last week, 2 weeks ago, 1 month ago, whatever. So connections is very much also important in what we say and in what we write. So I talk and act so as to make what I am saying here and now in this committee meeting about whether we should admit more minority students connected, to be connected or relevant. In other words, doesn't contradict, relevant to what I said last week about my fears of losing my job given the new government's turn to the right. Notice that let me say, there is a relation between losing my job because of a government which turns to the right and forbidding minority students to be given the chance to be supported or to be even admitted at some of the universities, as if I'm talking about the same behavior of the same government, suppose in one of the West countries, for example. Semiotics, good. What and how different symbol systems and different forms of knowledge count. I talk and act so as to make the knowledge and language of lawyers relevant or not over everyday language or over non-lawyerly academic language. Suppose now I am a lawyer. In general, lawyers do speak in a given way, in certain ways, especially if they are in their work. At courts, for example, in their business offices, whatever. Now, we have something called everyday language. Everyday language, what I mean by everyday language, it is the common language used between people. The informal language. The language I use in the street. I use at my home. But now, suppose I'm a lawyer and I want to say something about some laws. If I use the language of lawyers, which is called sometimes the register, by the way, that might not be understood by the common people. It differs from the everyday language. Why? Because I might use some symbols, some acronyms, some words which have certain meanings in the field of law between lawyers. If they are used in the same way, the people of the street, common people who are not specialists in law, who are not lawyers, wouldn't understand. So I would talk about law, about our business as lawyers, but at the same time I would use a level of the language which is not over the everyday language, which is almost similar. So what and how different symbol systems and different forms of knowledge count. I talk and act so as to make the knowledge and language of lawyers relevant or not over everyday language. Let me make it even easier. If I'm speaking about linguistics with those who are specialists, the language that I will use will be understood by the linguists. For example, instead of saying letter, I would say phoneme. Instead of saying phone, I would say olophone. If I use phoneme and olophone, while I am involved in an everyday language with common people, they wouldn't understand me. Because these two words are part of linguistics, a field that they are not specialists in. So I talk and act, even if I want to talk about linguistics, with those who are not specialists in everyday language. I will talk about the same thing, but using different level of the language. I talk and act so as to make the knowledge and language of lawyers relevant. In other words, could be understood by common people, people who are not specialists, who are not lawyers. Relevant or not over everyday language or over non-lawyerly academic language, language which is not the language of lawyers, in our committee discussion of facilitating the admission of more minority students. There are several tools of inquiry. There are several tools of inquiry. What I mean by several tools of inquiry, ways of looking at the world of talk and interaction that will help us study how these building tasks that we have just covered are carried out and with what social and political consequences. There are several tools of inquiry. What I mean by tools of inquiry, ways of looking at the world of talk and interaction. how I can understand, how I can interpret a given talk, how I can interpret a given text. Tools that I would use to understand a given text, to understand a given talk. The tools of inquiry that will be introduced in this chapter are primarily relevant to how we build identities and activities and recognize the identities and activities that are being built around us. So these tools will help us understand the way I wish people can see me, through what I write or through what I speak. In other words, the identity I like for myself, and I like people to describe it, to see it. These tools would help me understand this, and it also would help me understand the outside world, the identities of others. So the tools of inquiry that will be introduced in this chapter are primarily relevant, suitable to how we build identities and activities and recognize the identities and activities that are being built around us. So it helps us build our own identity in the way we like, and it helps us understand why other people try to have such an identity about themselves. When I say identity, how you like to appear, how you like to be seen by other people. So these tools will help me understand why those people try to appear in that way. And it also would help me know how I can, let me say, succeed in appearing in a given way, in showing my own identity to people in the way I like. The tools of inquiry that will be introduced in this chapter are primarily relevant to how we build identities and activities and recognize. Understand means the identities and activities that are being built around us. However, the tools of inquiry introduced here are most certainly caught up with all the other building tasks above. The building task that we have just covered, these tools have something to do with it, as well as we will see progressively in this book. The tools to be discussed in this chapter, so the tools that we are going to discuss now, in other words, the ways of looking at the world of talk and interaction. First, situated identities. That is, different identities or social positions we enact and recognize in different settings. In other words, in different settings, different situations, you act and you speak in different ways. If you are at home, you would speak in a way, your identity would differ from the way you do speak when you are, let me say, in a lecture hall. The identity you have in the lecture hall is that you are a student, so you have to speak in a way which could be described as formal, but if you are at home, you have another identity. There, you are not a student. Indeed, there, you are one of the family members. You are the child. You are the son. So, situated identities. Identity is determined to a great extent by the situation. If I am a doctor at the university, if I go home, I couldn't play the role of a doctor with my children. If my identity at home is not as a doctor, so the way I do adapt to speak with my children must differ as well. Situated identities, that is different identities or social positions we enact and recognize in different settings. B, social languages. That is different styles of language that we use to enact and recognize different identities in different settings. Different social languages also allow us to engage in all the other building tasks above. For example, social languages means what? We have different styles of languages. The language that we use might be formal. It might be intimate. It might be frozen. It might be informal. It might be consultative. I'm talking about different styles of speech. In the past, people think that we have only two styles, to speak formally or to speak informally. And this would determine the relation between you and the interlocutor, the one to whom you do speak. Indeed, linguists have found out that even between formality and informality, we have something between. We have formal, but less formal. We have informal, but less informal. So we have casual speech. So we might talk about two styles which are described to be informal, but one of them is more formal than the other, or more informal than the other. For example, if I speak with my brother, it is informal. And if I do speak with my friend, it is also informal. But the language used with my brother is very much intimate, but the language I use with my friend is less intimate. It is informal, right? But I can say that the language between me and my brother is very much informal. So, informality even, this is the point, degrees. Different degrees of formality and different degrees of informality. So, I might be formal while speaking with you, but I might be very much formal, and this is what we call frozen. What I mean frozen, as if I do not want to talk to you. I am very formal to the degree that you might think that I don't want even to talk to you. This is called frozen style. So social languages, that is different styles of language that we use, different styles of language, formal, informal, for example, that we use to enact and recognize different identities in different settings. Yes, a student couldn't talk with his doctor the way he does talk with his colleague. Okay, so that we use to enact and recognize different identities in different settings. Different social languages also allow us to engage in all the other building tasks. Discourses with a capital D. That is, different ways in which we humans integrate language with non-language stuff. Sometimes, even while speaking, you make integration between languages and other, or sometimes it is called extra-linguistic factors. Here it is called non-language stuff. For example, the same sentence might be said, but how your face appears would make it understood in different ways. So this is what I mean by non-language stuff. How you behave while speaking. How your eyes do appear. You stare or not. So that is different ways in which we human integrate language with non-language stuff, such as if I'm speaking while moving my hands would be understood in a way that differs from speaking while my hand is like this. If I say that, this is a matter of warning. But if I say the same thing while my hands are here, tied, that might not be understood as warning signal. So, as different ways of thinking. Okay. Conversations with a capital C, that is long-running and important themes or motifs that have been the focus of a variety of different texts and interactions in different social languages and discourse through a significant stretch of time and across an array of institutions. Conversations with a capital C, that is long-running and important themes or motifs that have been the focus of a variety of different things. What is the crucial thing I want to achieve in a given text? What is the most important thing? That most important thing could be found in that text, and the same thing could be found in another text. It could be found in my speak now, and it could be found in the speech of other. The central point that the text has, or the central point that your talk has. I would like to thank you all, and I hope I have covered everything and you have understood everything. Thank you so much.